Historical development of professional social work across the world, UK, USA, and India. Historical development of social work in UK, 1. Early foundations, charity and poor relief, pre-19th century, medieval and Tudor periods. The responsibility for caring for the poor largely fell to the church and local communities. Almsgiving and religious charities were the primary forms of social assistance. The Elizabethan Poor Law, 1601. This law categorized the poor into deserving poor, elderly, sick, disabled, who received aid; undeserving poor, able-bodied unemployed, who were expected to work. Workhouses, 18th century. The 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act led to the establishment of workhouses, where the poor were provided with shelter and employment under harsh conditions. 2. Victorian era, the rise of organized charity, 19th century, Charity Organization Society, COS, 1869, focused on scientific methods of poverty relief, emphasizing casework and moral reform. Settlement house movement, influenced by figures like Octavia Hill and Samuel Barnett, founders of Toynbee Hall, 1884, settlement houses provided education, healthcare, and social services to poor urban communities. Legislative reforms, the Factory Acts, 19th century, regulated working conditions. The Education Act 1870 introduced compulsory schooling. The Public Health Act 1875 improved sanitation. 3. Early 20th century, the birth of modern social work. Seabohm Roundtree's study, 1901, his research on poverty in York influenced social policy reforms. State intervention and welfare expansion, the Beveridge Report, 1942, laid the foundation for the welfare state. The Children Act 1908 introduced early child protection policies. The National Insurance Act 1911 introduced unemployment benefits. Professionalization of social work, the first formal social work training programs began in the early 20th century. Social work expanded into healthcare, child welfare, and housing. 4. The post-war welfare state, 1940s, 1970s, creation of the NHS, 1948. Free healthcare transformed social work's role in medical settings. Expansion of public services, social workers were increasingly involved in housing, mental health, and child welfare. Legislation supporting social work, the Children Act 1948 established local authority child welfare services. The Mental Health Act 1959 emphasized community-based care. 5. Late 20th century, social work as a profession. Seabohm Report, 1968 recommended unified social services departments in local authorities, leading to the Local Authority Social Services Act 1970. Expansion of social work roles, social workers became key figures in child protection, mental health, and disability services. Community care movement, 1980s, 1990s, the Community Care Act 1990 shifted care from institutions to community-based services. Focus on empowering service users rather than controlling them. 6. 21st century, modern challenges and reforms. The Children Act 1989 and 2004 strengthened child protection laws and introduced multi-agency cooperation. Austerity measures, 2010s budget cuts impacted social services, increasing pressure on social workers. Social Work England, 2019. A new regulatory body for social workers replaced the Health and Care Professions Council, HCPC. Digital and technological advances, the use of digital case management, telehealth, and AI in social services. Historical development of social work in USA, 1. Early American charity and poor relief, 17th to 19th century, colonial poor laws, 1600s, 1700s, modeled after England's Elizabethan poor laws, local governments provided relief to the deserving poor, elderly, widows, disabled, while discouraging dependence. Almshouses and workhouses, 18th to 19th century, established in cities to house the poor, elderly, and mentally ill. Often overcrowded and provided minimal care. Charity Organization Societies, COS, late 1800s, first COS in the U.S. founded in Buffalo, New York, 1877. Promoted scientific charity with casework methods rather than direct financial aid. Settlement House Movement, 1880s, 1920s, inspired by Jane Addams and Hull House, 1889, Chicago. Provided education, housing, and advocacy for immigrants and the poor. Shifted focus from individual charity to social reform. 2. The rise of professional social work, early 20th century, Mary Richmond and the birth of casework, published Social Diagnosis, 1917, which laid the foundation for casework. Expansion into child welfare and mental health, the Children's Bureau, 1912, focused on child labor and welfare. Mental health reform efforts led by Dorothea Dix improved asylum conditions. Great Depression and the New Deal, 1930s Social Security Act, 1935, introduced unemployment insurance and aid to dependent children. The government took a more active role in social welfare. Emergence of school and medical social work. Schools and hospitals began hiring social workers to assist with family and health issues. 3. Post-war growth and the welfare state, 1940s, 1970s, expansion of public assistance, GI Bill, 1944, provided education and housing assistance to veterans. War on Poverty, 1960s, under President Lyndon B. Johnson created Medicare and Medicaid, 1965, Food Stamps Program Head Start, 1965, for early childhood education. Civil rights and social justice movements, social workers played key roles in civil rights, disability rights, and women's rights movements. Community organizing became a major focus, e.g., Saul Alinsky's activism. Point 4. Modern social work, 1980s present, neoliberalism and welfare reform, 1980s, 1990s, Welfare Reform Act, 1996, introduced work requirements for welfare recipients. Increased privatization of social services. Expansion into mental health, trauma, and forensic social work, greater emphasis on clinical social work and trauma-informed care. Technology and social work, 2000s present telehealth and online case management. Use of data analytics in social policy. Focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, addressing systemic racism, LGBTQ+ rights, and immigration policy. Social workers advocating for criminal justice reform and refugee support. Historical development of social work in India. 1. Ancient and medieval period, community welfare and religious charity. Ancient India, Vedic and post-Vedic periods. The concept of dharma, duty, emphasized helping the poor, sick, and elderly. Kings and rulers provided relief through dana, charity, and bhiksha, almsgiving. Religious texts like the Vedas, Upanishads, and Smritis encouraged social welfare. Buddhism and Jainism, 6th century BCE, 3rd century CE. Buddha and Mahavira promoted compassion, equality, and care for the marginalized. Monasteries, viharas, served as centers for education and healthcare. Medieval India, Islamic rule, 12th to 18th century. Zakat, Islamic charity tax, provided for the poor. Mughal emperors, especially Akbar, promoted social welfare through public works, hospitals, and education. Point 2. British colonial era, 18th to 20th century. Institutional charity and social reform movements. Christian missionaries and charity organizations. European missionaries established schools, orphanages, and healthcare centers. The British government introduced poor laws but focused more on law and order than welfare. Indian social reformers, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Brahmo Samaj, 1828, campaigned against sati and for women's rights. Ishvar Chandra Vijayasagar promoted widow remarriage and education. Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule worked for Dalit rights and women's education. Swami Vivekananda emphasized social service as a religious duty. Mahatma Gandhi promoted self-reliance, Swaraj, rural development, and non-violence. Early welfare legislation, Factory Act, 1881, regulated child labor. Widow Remarriage Act, 1856, encouraged social change. Abolition of sati, 1829, ended the practice of burning widows. 3. Emergence of professional social work, 1930s, 1947, influence of Western social work, Inspired by the Settlement House Movement and charity organization Society, COS, from the West. First social work education institution, Sir Dorabji Tata Graduate School of Social Work, 1936, in Mumbai, now TISS, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Role in Freedom Movement, social workers engaged in rural reconstruction, education, and health services. Leaders like Vinoba Bhave, Buddhan movement, promoted land redistribution. 4. Post-independence period, 1947-1980s state-led welfare and expansion of social work constitutional provisions, 1950 fundamental rights and directive principles emphasized equality, education, and social justice. Expansion of social welfare programs, 5-year plans, 1951 onwards, focused on poverty alleviation, education, and rural development. Community Development Program, 1952, for rural welfare. Integrated Child Development Services, ICDS, 1975, for child nutrition and education. Growth of social work education, more universities started social work courses, Delhi University, Madras School of Social Work, etc. Legislation for social welfare, Hindu Marriage Act, 1955, Dowry Prohibition Act, 1961, Bonded Labor Abolition Act, 1976. Expansion of NGOs, organizations like SUA, Self-Employed Women's Association, 1972, empowered women. 5. Modern social work, 1990s, present rights-based approach and globalization economic liberalization, 1991, led to privatization, increasing the role of NGOs and corporate social responsibility, CSR. Legislative reforms, Juvenile Justice Act, 2000, Right to Education, 2009, Mental Health Care Act, 2017. Emergence of digital and global social work, use of technology in social work interventions, telecounseling, digital activism. Collaboration with UN, WHO, and international agencies for disaster relief, climate change, and human rights. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe this channel. See you in next video.